Ambassador Ilara Voss stood at the center of the Galactic Senate Chamber on Thesak Prime, the capital world of the Velithari Empire. Around her rose thousands of seats, carved into the walls of a massive dome, filled with representatives of over 600 alien species. Some had scales, some had wings, some were nothing more than clouds of glowing gas held together by magnetic fields. All of them looked down at the single human woman standing on the speaker's platform like she was something small and unimportant. She had been doing this for 12 years now. Every cycle, she came here, stood in this same spot, and delivered Earth's contribution report. Every cycle, the numbers were bigger. Every cycle, the applause was smaller. In the last standard cycle, Ilara said, her voice calm and steady, Earth provided medical research that led to cures for the Velkani blood rot, the Thessian lung collapse, and the Dranovi reef plague. Our agricultural scientists developed new crop strains that increased food production on 17 colony worlds by 40%. Our engineers stabilized the Coravine Dyson scaffold after your own teams declared it beyond repair. And our soldiers held the defensive line at Outer Vale Station 9 for 114 days against Wraith swarm attacks, suffering 60% casualties while the Velithari reinforcement fleet was delayed. She paused and looked around the chamber. A few delegates shifted in their seats. Most did not even bother to look at her. Earth's contribution rating remains Tier 9, she continued, the lowest classification in the Empire. Nobody objected. Nobody even reacted. Tier 9 was where humanity had been placed 42 years ago, when Earth first joined the Empire. And Tier 9 was where humanity would stay. That was simply how things worked. Ilara remembered the stories her grandmother used to tell her about first contact. It happened in 2145, when the Velithari survey ship appeared in Earth's sky like a second moon. The whole world had stared up in wonder. Humanity had dreamed of meeting alien life for centuries, and when it finally happened, they opened their arms wide. They shared everything, their science, their art, their music, their food, their medicine. They held nothing back, because they believed that was what good neighbors did. The Empire accepted all of it with a smile, and gave almost nothing in return. Over the decades, humans spread across the galaxy. Human doctors traveled to alien worlds and fought diseases that had killed millions. Human engineers built power stations and communication networks on planets that had never known such technology. Human soldiers volunteered for the most dangerous military postings, because other species considered them suicide missions. Humans did all of this gladly, because they believed they were building something good. They believed the galaxy would see their worth and welcome them as equals. It never happened. Instead, a Velithari official named Consul Zorath Vel was assigned to oversee Earth. He was tall and thin, with silver skin and 4 narrow eyes that always seemed to be looking at something more interesting than whoever stood in front of him. His job was simple. He took what humans created, removed their names from it, stamped it with a Velithari seal, and sent it out into the galaxy as if his own people had invented it. The fusion reactor designs that now powered half the Empire's colonies were listed in official records as Velithari innovations. The medical breakthroughs that saved billions of alien lives were credited to Velithari research institutes that had never employed a single human. And when humans asked for access to faster-than-light travel technology so they could explore the galaxy on their own terms, Zorath Vel denied the request. Tier 9 species did not receive FTL clearance. It was policy. He said this with the same bored expression he used for everything. Ilara knew all of this. She had lived it. She had watched human scientists weep when they discovered their life's work had been stolen. She had attended the funerals of human soldiers, whose sacrifices were recorded in imperial archives as minor engagements involving auxiliary forces. She had seen the hope in her people's eyes slowly go dark over the years, replaced by something quiet and heavy that nobody talked about. But she kept coming back to the Senate. She kept delivering her reports. She kept believing that if humanity just gave a little more, tried a little harder, proved themselves a little better, the galaxy would finally see them. Then Mandate 7 Omega was announced. The Senate passed it on a routine vote on an ordinary afternoon. Most delegates did not even pay attention to what they were approving. The mandate required Earth to provide 20% of its population as conscripted labor for the Empire's dying mining colonies in the Outer Reach. These were places where the air was poisoned and the rock was sharp, and workers rarely lasted more than a few years. On top of that, the mandate banned humans from holding patents on any invention created using Imperial resources, which meant everything, since Earth itself was classified as an Imperial resource. Elara stood on the speaker's platform and listened as the Senate clerk read the mandate aloud. She watched the numbers flash on the display screen. 600 species had voted. 587 voted in favor. 13 abstained. 0 voted against. Not a single species in the entire galaxy had stood up for humanity. She looked up at the seats around her, at the Velathari delegates who were already packing up their things to leave, at the Chalhari representatives who clicked their mandibles in bored conversation, at Consul Zorath Vel, who sat in his elevated box and examined his fingers as though he had already forgotten that any of this had happened. Elara closed her folder. She straightened her jacket. She looked directly at Zorath Vel, and for one long moment their eyes met. He raised one eyebrow as if to ask whether she had something to say. She said nothing. She turned and walked off the platform. Her footsteps echoed through the chamber as she crossed the long floor toward the exit. A few delegates glanced at her with mild curiosity. Most did not notice at all. The doors of the Galactic Senate closed behind her with a deep, heavy sound that echoed through the hallway. She walked alone to the human embassy ship docked in the orbital station above. She boarded it. She sat down in her chair and stared out the window at the vast, glittering capital of the Empire that had taken everything her people had to give and never once said thank you. She activated her quantum communicator and sent a single message to Earth. It contained only 2 words: "It's time." Back on Earth, in a secure chamber beneath the rebuilt city of Geneva, Chancellor Idris Okafor received the message. He read it once, he closed his eyes, and then he called a meeting that would change the history of the galaxy forever. The open hand that humanity had extended to the stars for 42 years was about to close. 3 weeks after Mandate 7 Omega was passed, the United Terran Council met in emergency session beneath the city of Geneva. The chamber was deep underground, built into rock that was older than civilization itself. 200 representatives from every nation on Earth sat in curved rows facing a single podium. The air was thick with tension. Nobody smiled. Nobody made small talk. They all knew why they were here. Chancellor Idris Okafor stood at the podium. He was a tall man with gray hair and steady hands, and eyes that had seen too much disappointment to be surprised by anything anymore. He had served Earth for 30 years in various roles, first as a diplomat, then as a military advisor, and now as the leader of all humanity. He had spent his entire career trying to earn the galaxy's respect through patience and service. He was done. "You have all read the mandate," he said. His voice was low and even. 20% of our people, sent to die in mines on worlds that the Empire itself considers worthless. Our inventions, our discoveries, our art, all of it taken from us by law. Not just in practice, as it has been for decades, but now officially, permanently, and without apology. He paused and looked at the faces before him. Some were angry, some were sad, some were simply tired. I have spent my life believing that if we were kind enough, if we were useful enough, if we gave enough of ourselves, the galaxy would see us as equals. I was wrong. They will never see us as equals, not because we are less than them, but because they have decided that we are, and no amount of giving will change a decision that was never based on evidence in the first place. He placed both hands on the podium. So I am asking you today to vote on something we should have done a long time ago. I am asking you to bring our people home, all of them, and I am asking you to seal the gates. The vote was unanimous. Every single representative pressed the same button. 200 green lights appeared on the display screen. Not one red, not one yellow. For the first time in 42 years, all of humanity agreed on something. The next morning, Chancellor Okafor sat in front of a camera and delivered a broadcast that was transmitted on every galactic frequency simultaneously. It reached every ship, every station, every planet, and every listening device in the known galaxy. His face appeared on screens in Senate halls and military bases and market squares on worlds that most humans had never even heard of. "This is Chancellor Idris Okafor of Earth," he said. "I am speaking to the Galactic Empire and to every species within it. Effective immediately, Earth is withdrawing from the Velithari Empire. We are not declaring war, we are not making threats, we are simply leaving. We will no longer provide our labor, our science, our soldiers, or our goodwill to an empire that has repaid our generosity with contempt. To every human currently living outside our solar system, you have 72 hours to return home. After that, the gates will close. To the rest of the galaxy, we wish you well. We hope you find what you need, but you will no longer find it in us." The broadcast ended. The galaxy stared at its screens in confused silence. Then the laughter started. On Thesak Prime, Consul Zorath Vel watched the broadcast in his private office and smiled his thin, bored smile. He called it a tantrum. He told the Senate that the humans would come crawling back within a single cycle, begging for readmission. He had seen this before with other minor species. They made noise, they pouted, and then they remembered how small they were and returned to their place. The Velithari, the Kelsor, the Mithrani, all of them laughed in their own way. The humans were Tier 9. They were useful tools at best. Tools did not get to decide when they were done being used. But while the galaxy laughed, something extraordinary happened on Earth. Deep beneath the surface of the moon, inside a facility that had been secretly constructed over 30 years, a network of machines older than the Empire itself hummed to life. This was Project Aegis, and it was humanity's greatest secret. For 3 decades, Earth's best scientists had worked in silence, studying the alien technology they had been denied access to, and then surpassing it completely. They had built something the Empire had never imagined a Tier 9 species could build. A shimmering wall of energy expanded outward from Earth at the speed of light. It passed the moon. It passed Mars. It passed Jupiter and Saturn and Neptune and Pluto. It reached the very edge of the solar system and stopped, forming a perfect sphere of overlapping gravitational distortion fields and quantum-locked energy barriers that surrounded everything humanity called home. Nothing could get in. Nothing could get out. The barrier was seamless, silent, and absolute. Across the galaxy, human expatriates received the call through quantum-entangled communicators that could not be blocked or intercepted. They had 72 hours. 94% of them chose to come home. They left behind jobs and homes and friendships and lives they had built on alien worlds, and they came home because Earth asked them to, and because they were tired of living in a galaxy that treated them like they were nothing. The ships arrived one by one through narrow openings in the barrier that sealed shut behind them like healing wounds. The last ship through carried a group of human doctors who had been treating a plague on a Chelhari colony world. They had finished their work, packed their bags, and left detailed instructions for the local medical staff. Even in leaving, they could not help being kind. Then the barrier closed completely, and the solar system went dark on every galactic map. For the first few days, nobody in the Empire cared. The Senate continued its business. The military ran its patrols. The markets opened and closed. Life went on as though nothing had changed. Then things started to break. It began small. A medical station on the Drenovian homeworld reported that its diagnostic systems were producing errors. The software had been written by humans, and without human engineers to maintain it, the updates stopped coming. Within a week, the entire planetary health network was running on outdated code. Then the agricultural worlds noticed. The crop strains that humans had engineered needed regular recalibration to adjust to changing soil chemistry. Without human agronomists to perform the adjustments, yields dropped by 15% in the first month and kept falling. Then the military noticed. The tactical algorithms that governed the Empire's border defense network had been designed by human strategists. The Wraith Swarm, a mindless but endlessly adaptive predator species that had threatened the galaxy for centuries, began probing the defensive lines. The algorithms needed constant updating to counter new Wraith tactics. Without human tacticians to do the updating, gaps appeared, small at first, then larger. On a Velithari warship patrolling the Outer Veil, an admiral named Soreth Khan stared at his tactical display. Red warning lights were spreading across the map like a disease. 3 border stations had gone silent in the last 2 days. Sensor coverage was dropping. The Wraith were moving in patterns the defense network could no longer predict. He turned to his communications officer. "Get me Consul Zorath Val." "The consul is in a Senate session, Admiral. He says the situation is under control." Zorath looked back at the map. Another station went red as he watched. He thought about the human officers who used to serve on his ship. He thought about how they had always known what the Wraith would do next, as though they could think like the enemy in a way that no other species could. He thought about how he had never once thanked them for it. "Under control?" he repeated quietly. He watched another light go dark on the map. It was not under control. Nothing was under control. And deep down in a place he would never admit to anyone, Admiral Soreth Khan already knew the truth. The humans were not coming back, and the galaxy was not ready for what came next. 6 months after Earth sealed its gates, the first world fell. It was a small colony called Veltheris 7, a mining settlement on the edge of Wraith Swarm territory. It had a population of 40,000, mostly Chelhari workers and their families. The colony's defense grid had been designed by human engineers 15 years ago. It was a brilliant system, layered and adaptive, capable of predicting Wraith attack patterns and adjusting its response in real time. But the system needed regular updates to its prediction models, and the humans who understood those models were gone. The Wraith came on a Tuesday, by Earth's calendar. They came in a wave of black shapes that blotted out the stars like a living storm. The defense grid activated, but its predictions were 6 months out of date. The Wraith had already evolved past them. They punched through the outer defenses in 40 minutes. The colony sent a distress signal. By the time the nearest Imperial warship arrived, there was nothing left but empty buildings and silence. The news spread across the galaxy like a cold wind. Veltheris 7 was the first colony lost to the Wraith in over a century. The Senate held an emergency session. Consul Zorath Vel stood at his podium and blamed the colony's governor for poor maintenance. He did not mention humans. He never mentioned humans if he could avoid it. But the galaxy was beginning to notice what was missing. On the Drenovian homeworld, a water planet of vast oceans and floating cities, the grayscale plague had begun to spread. It was a retroviral disease that turned living tissue gray and brittle like old stone. It had first appeared 3 years ago, and human medical researchers had developed an antiviral treatment that kept it under control. The treatment worked, but it needed to be adjusted every few months as the virus mutated. Without human researchers to adjust the formula, the old version of the treatment became less and less effective. By the 8th month after Earth's withdrawal, hospitals on the Drenevian homeworld were overflowing. The grayscale had jumped to 2 neighboring species through shared water systems. Millions were infected. Tens of thousands were dying. Drenevian scientists worked desperately to modify the treatment themselves, but they had never fully understood the human research it was based on. They had never needed to. The humans had always been there to fix things. On the agricultural worlds of the Kelsor Federation, crops were failing. The genetically modified strains that humans had designed were incredibly productive, but they were also incredibly specific. They required precise nutrient balances and soil treatments that only human agronomists fully understood. Without those adjustments, the crops weakened, mutated, and died. Food shortages spread across 12 worlds in the first year. Rationing was introduced. Riots followed. The translation systems were failing too. Humans had built the universal translation algorithms that allowed 600 species to communicate with each other. The algorithms were elegant and complex, capable of handling not just language, but tone, intent, and cultural context. But language evolved constantly, and the algorithms needed updating. Without human linguists to maintain them, misunderstandings became common. Diplomatic messages were mistranslated. Trade agreements were misread. Small conflicts erupted over words that nobody had said. And through all of this, the Wraith swarm grew bolder. The Wraith were not intelligent in the way that other species understood intelligence. They did not build cities or write poetry, or argue in Senate chambers. They were a biological weapon of pure hunger. A swarm of organisms that consumed everything in their path and adapted to any defense faster than any species could counter them. For centuries, the Empire had held them at bay through a combination of military force and strategic brilliance. Much of that brilliance had come from humans. Human tacticians had a gift for understanding the Wraith. They could see patterns in the swarm's behavior that other species missed. They could predict where the next attack would come and prepare defenses that worked not just today, but for the next dozen attacks. Without them, the Empire's border defense became reactive instead of proactive, always one step behind, always arriving too late. In the 14th month after Earth's withdrawal, the Wraith breached the Outer Veil, the Empire's primary defensive line. It was the first breach in 300 years. An entire sector of space, containing dozens of colony worlds and billions of people, was suddenly exposed to the swarm. The Imperial fleet scrambled to respond, but their formations were designed by human strategists. And without human officers to adapt them, the ships moved in patterns the Wraith had already learned to exploit. Consul Zorath Vel decided it was time to end the problem at its source. He assembled a diplomatic fleet of 12 warships and flew to the edge of Earth's sealed solar system. He broadcast a message demanding that the barrier be lowered and that humanity resume its duties to the Empire. He used words like obligation and responsibility and consequences. The barrier did not respond. There was no message, no signal, no acknowledgement of any kind. Just silence, and a wall of energy that stretched across the darkness of space like a curtain drawn across a window. Zorath Vel ordered his ships to fire. 12 warships unleashed their full arsenal against the barrier. Plasma beams, graviton torpedoes, antimatter warheads, everything the Empire had built for war was thrown at the wall that surrounded humanity's home. The weapons hit the barrier and vanished. They did not explode. They did not bounce back. They simply stopped existing, absorbed into the energy field like raindrops falling into an ocean. The fleet's science officer ran a full scan of the barrier, and then ran it again, because the results made no sense. The technology that powered the barrier was beyond anything in the Empire's databases. It used principles that Velathari physicists had theorized about, but never achieved. The humans, the Tier 9 species that the Empire had denied access to basic FTL technology, had built something that the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy could not even understand, let alone break through. Zorath Vel stared at the scan results for a long time. Then he ordered his fleet to withdraw. He did not speak for the entire journey back to Thessac Prime. While the galaxy burned, something very different was happening behind the barrier. Earth was at peace, freed from the Empire's restrictions and the endless drain of serving a galaxy that did not appreciate them. Humanity turned its energy inward. Scientists who had spent their careers solving other species' problems finally had time to solve their own. Engineers who had built infrastructure for alien worlds built new cities on Earth, on Mars, on the moons of Jupiter and Saturn. Art flourished. Music filled the streets of rebuilt cities. Children grew up without knowing the weight of serving an ungrateful empire. For the first time in 42 years, humans lived for themselves, and they discovered that they were very good at it. But they were not ignorant of what was happening outside. They had sensors that could see through their own barrier, and they watched the galaxy struggling. They watched the plagues and the famines and the falling border defenses. They watched the Wraith consume colony after colony. And they felt something complicated. Not satisfaction, not revenge. Something closer to sadness, mixed with a stubborn, aching resolve. They had given everything, and it had not been enough to earn respect. Now the galaxy was learning through absence what it had refused to learn through presence. On dozens of worlds across the Empire, other subjugating species watched what was happening and began to ask dangerous questions. The insectoid Chelhari, who had been forced into labor contracts for generations, organized their first general strike. The aquatic Drenavians, dying from a plague that humans could have cured, publicly demanded the overthrow of Consul Zorath Vel. The silicon-based Korath, a quiet and ancient species who rarely spoke at all, transmitted a single message to every world in the galaxy. It said only this: the humans were right. And on Thessac Prime, a young Velathari scholar named Tessera Kine sat in a restricted archive and read documents that were never meant to be seen by the public. Documents that showed the true scale of humanity's contributions to the Empire. Documents that showed how those contributions had been stolen, renamed, and erased. Documents that proved that every major advancement the Empire had claimed as its own in the last 4 decades had been built by human hands. She copied the documents. She published them on every network she could access. And then she ran. Because she knew that the hegemony would come for her. And she knew that the truth she had released would spread faster than they could ever contain it. The galaxy was unraveling, and for the first time, it was beginning to understand why. 3 years after Earth sealed its gates, the Galactic Empire was dying. The Galactic Senate on Thessac Prime, once the most powerful governing body in known space, had become a room full of desperate people screaming at each other. Sessions that used to run with cold, efficient arrogance now dissolved into chaos within minutes. Representatives blamed each other. They blamed the military. They blamed the Valathari hegemony. They blamed everyone except themselves, because admitting the truth meant admitting that they had all voted for Mandate 7 Omega. They had all driven humanity away. Every single one of them had a hand in this disaster, and not one of them wanted to hold that weight. 3 elder species, the Kelsor Federation, the Mithrani Collective, and the Silverine Communion, formally seceded from the Empire in the same week. They declared that the Valathari hegemony had led the galaxy to ruin, and they would no longer follow it. Civil war erupted along the Outer Rim as loyalist fleets clashed with secessionist forces. worlds that had been at peace for centuries, burned under orbital bombardment from their own former allies. And through all of this, the Wraith Swarm watched and waited and grew. The swarm had spent 3 years feeding on the colonies that fell after the outer veil was breached. Each world it consumed made it stronger, larger, more adaptive. What had once been a manageable threat held at bay by human-designed defenses had become a tidal wave of hunger rolling toward the galactic core. Imperial intelligence gave it a name. They called it the Black Tide. The Black Tide moved in a pattern that no surviving tactician could predict. It split into dozens of tendrils that struck simultaneously at widely separated targets, overwhelming the Empire's ability to respond. Fleets rushed from crisis to crisis, always arriving too late, always finding empty worlds and the fading chemical signatures of Wraith digestion. The swarm was not just attacking. It was herding the Empire's forces, pulling them apart, stretching them thin, and then striking at the gaps. A human tactician would have recognized the pattern immediately, but there were no human tacticians left in the Empire's military. In the Senate, Consul Zorath Fel still held his position. He had survived 3 votes of no confidence through a combination of political manipulation and the simple fact that no one else wanted the job. He was thinner now, his silver skin dull, and his 4 eyes constantly shifting. He spent his days in closed meetings with loyalist officials, planning strategies that failed before they were implemented, and making promises that everyone knew he could not keep. He still refused to admit that the Empire needed humanity. He called the crisis temporary. He called the Wraith Swarm a manageable threat. He called the secessions minor disagreements. He said these things in public, while his hands shook under the table, and his staff whispered about the drinking. But outside the walls of the Senate, the galaxy was changing. Tessara Kine's leaked documents had spread to every corner of known space. The young Velithari scholar had become the most wanted fugitive in the Empire, and the most famous voice of truth the galaxy had ever heard. She moved from world to world, hidden by sympathetic aliens and protected by the growing rebellion of subjugated species. She gave interviews from hidden locations. She published analysis after analysis, proving that humanity had been the backbone of the Empire, and that the hegemony had deliberately erased their contributions. Her work changed minds. Slowly at first, then faster. Species that had laughed at humans for decades began to feel something unfamiliar. It was closer to the sick feeling of realizing you had destroyed something precious because you were too proud to see its value. The breaking point came when the Black Tide reached the Thessarian Corridor, the main trade route connecting the galactic core to the outer colonies. If the corridor fell, the Empire would be cut in half. Every remaining fleet was pulled to defend it. The battle lasted 11 days. The Empire held the corridor, but barely, and at a cost of over 2,000 warships and millions of lives. Everyone knew the next attack would be worse. Everyone knew the corridor would not hold a second time. The Senate had no more options. The military had no more strategies. The Empire had nothing left but its pride, and pride could not stop the Wraith. A delegation of moderate senators approached Tessara Kine in secret. They asked her to serve as an envoy to Earth. She was the only person in the galaxy who had publicly defended humanity, the only one who had told the truth when everyone else was lying. If anyone could convince the humans to listen, it was her. Tessara agreed. She traveled to the edge of Earth's sealed solar system in a small, unarmed ship. She stopped a safe distance from the barrier and broadcast a message. Not a demand, not a threat, just the truth. "My name is Tessara Kin," she said. "I am Velithari, and I am ashamed of what my people have done to yours. I am not here to give orders or make threats. I am here because the galaxy is dying, and we did it to ourselves by driving away the best of us. I am asking, not demanding, for the chance to speak. If you say no, I will leave and never return. But I hope you will say yes, because there are billions of innocent people out there who are suffering for the sins of their leaders, and they do not deserve to die for the pride of the powerful. For 2 hours, there was nothing but silence and the cold light of distant stars reflecting off the barrier's surface. Then, a small opening appeared in the barrier, barely large enough for a single ship. A human shuttle emerged, sleek and advanced, built with technology that made Tessara's ship look like a child's toy. The shuttle docked with her vessel, and a door opened, and Ambassador Elara Voss stepped through. Elara looked different from the woman who had walked out of the Senate 3 years ago. She was older, harder. There were lines around her eyes that spoke of difficult decisions and sleepless nights. But her gaze was steady, and her voice was calm, and when she looked at Tessara, there was no hatred in her eyes, only a deep, tired clarity. They met on a neutral station in unclaimed space, just the two of them in a small room with a table between them. Tessara laid out the state of the galaxy, the plagues, the famines, the wraith, the civil war. She held nothing back and made no excuses. She simply told the truth and let it sit in the room like a weight. Elara listened without interrupting. When Tessara finished, Elara placed a data crystal on the table. "These are our terms," she said. "They are not negotiable." Tessara read the terms. Full recognition of humanity as a sovereign Tier 1 civilization. Reparations paid to Earth and to every other species that had been exploited by the hegemony. Dissolution of the Velathari veto power in the Senate. A new galactic charter guaranteeing the rights and independence of all species. And a full, public, official acknowledgement of every contribution humanity had ever made, and every injustice that had been done to them. Tessara looked up from the crystal. "The hegemony will never accept this." "Then the hegemony will fall," Elara said, "and the galaxy will learn to build something better in its place." Tessara brought the terms back to the Senate. The reaction was exactly what Elara had predicted. The loyalists erupted in fury. Consul Zorath Vel called the terms an insult to the Empire's dignity. He declared that humanity was trying to humiliate the galaxy, and that no self-respecting civilization would bow to the demands of a Tier 9 species. Then he did something desperate. He attempted a coup. Using his remaining loyalist forces, Zorath Vel seized control of the Senate building and the orbital defense platforms above Thesak Prime. He declared himself emergency sovereign and ordered the Imperial fleet to assemble for a full military assault on Earth's barrier. He would break through the wall by force and drag humanity back into service where they belonged. But the fleet did not move. Ship after ship refused the order. Captains who had served alongside human officers, who had been trained by human tacticians, who had been saved by human soldiers, simply powered down their weapons and sat in silence. They would not fire on Earth. They would not follow Zorath Vel. And they were not alone. On Thesak Prime itself, the garrison turned on the loyalists. Soldiers opened the Senate doors. Security forces arrested Zorath Vel's supporters one by one. Zorath Vel himself was found in the consul's office, sitting behind his desk, staring at a blank screen. He did not resist when they came for him. He did not speak. The four narrow eyes that had once looked at humans with such bored contempt were empty now, and the silver skin that had once gleamed with power was dull and gray. They led him away, and nobody watched him go. The Senate, broken and humbled and finally honest, voted to accept every one of humanity's terms. The vote was not unanimous this time. It did not need to be. It was simply the only choice left. Tessara Kine sent a message to Earth. It was shorter than her first broadcast. It contained only 3 words. "We accept. Please." The barrier did not fall all at once. It opened slowly, like a curtain being drawn back from a window at dawn. The galaxy watched through every sensor and telescope and satellite it had left, holding its collective breath as the energy field that had hidden humanity for 3 years began to thin and dissolve, layer by layer, revealing what lay behind it. What they saw made them go silent. The solar system had been transformed. Earth itself was green and blue and alive in a way it had not been in centuries. The scars of old pollution and overcrowding were gone, replaced by cities that seemed to grow from the landscape like living things, built with materials and designs that blended technology with nature so seamlessly that it was hard to tell where one ended and the other began. Mars glowed with the faint blue haze of a new atmosphere. The moons of Jupiter and Saturn sparkled with the lights of settlements and research stations. A ring of orbital platforms circled the sun itself, harvesting energy on a scale the Empire had only dreamed about. In 3 years of isolation, freed from the burden of serving a galaxy that did not value them, humanity had leaped forward by what felt like a century. They had not wasted a single day. The first ships to emerge from the opening barrier were not warships. The galaxy had expected warships. It had expected anger, revenge, a fleet of weapons pointed at the throat of an empire that had wronged them. That was what any other species would have done. That was what the galaxy deserved. Instead, humanity sent hospital ships. They came in long, graceful lines, white and silver, marked with the medical symbol that humans had used for thousands of years. Behind them came engineering vessels loaded with tools and materials and construction drones. Behind those came seed arcs, carrying new crop strains designed to grow in any soil on any world. Behind those came communication relays that could restore the broken translation networks across the galaxy. Behind all of them came teachers, doctors, scientists, and engineers. The same kinds of people humanity had sent out into the galaxy 42 years ago. The same people the Empire had used and discarded and forgotten. They were coming back. But this time, they were coming back on their own terms. The hospital ships reached the Drenovian homeworld first. The grayscale plague had killed millions in the 3 years since Earth's withdrawal, and millions more were infected. The oceans that the Drenovians called home were clouded with the gray residue of the dead. When the human medical teams landed on the floating cities, the Drenovian elders wept. They actually wept, their massive bodies shaking as salt water poured from their secondary gills in the way their species expressed grief and gratitude simultaneously. The human doctors had brought an updated cure, not just a treatment, but a true cure, developed during the years of isolation using research techniques that the Empire had never allowed them to pursue. They administered it freely, without cost, without conditions. Within weeks, the plague began to retreat. But the doctors did something else too, something new. They sat with the Drenovian scientists and taught them. They explained every step of the research, every formula, every principle. They gave them not just the fish, as the old human saying went, but the knowledge to fish for themselves. When the human medical team eventually left the Drenovian homeworld, they left behind a generation of Drenovian scientists who understood their own medicine for the first time. The same pattern repeated across the galaxy. On the agricultural worlds, human agronomists restored the failing crops and then trained local farmers to maintain them independently. On the border worlds, human tacticians joined the fight against the Black Tide and turned the war within months, predicting the Wraith's movements with the same uncanny skill that no other species could match. But they also trained alien officers in human tactical doctrine, sharing the methods they had kept in their heads for decades. The Black Tide broke against the restored defensive lines like a wave against a seawall. The Wraith swarm, which had grown so bold during the years of human absence, suddenly found itself facing an enemy that could think faster than it could adapt. Human-led task forces drove the swarm back sector by sector, colony by colony, until the Wraith were pushed beyond the outer veil once again. The border was sealed. The galaxy was safe. But humanity did not stop there. On Thesak Prime, the old Galactic Senate Chamber was demolished. In its place, a new structure was built, designed by human architects in collaboration with builders from 30 different species. It was called the Hall of Voices, and it was the home of the new Galactic Assembly. Unlike the old Senate, where the Velathari hegemony had held veto power over every decision, the Assembly gave equal voice to every species, from the largest empire to the smallest colony. No species could override another. No species could be classified as inferior. The old tier system was abolished. Every civilization was Tier 1. Chancellor Idris Okafor traveled to Thesak Prime for the Assembly's opening ceremony. He was older now, his hair fully white, his steps slower, but his presence filled the Hall of Voices the way a deep note fills a cathedral. Representatives from hundreds of species sat in curved rows around him, and this time, every single one of them was looking at him. At him. He spoke simply, as he always did. "We did not seal our gates out of hatred," he said. "We sealed them so you would understand what you had, and what you lost when you refused to value it. A hand extended in friendship is not a hand that can be chained. We gave freely because that is who we are. But freedom has to go both ways. You cannot take everything a people have to offer and then tell them they are worthless. That is not partnership. That is not alliance. That is slavery with a polite name." He paused and looked around the chamber. "We are here now because we choose to be. Not because we were ordered. Not because we were forced. Because we believe that this galaxy can be better than it was, and because we believe that every species in this room deserves the chance to prove it. We will help you. We will teach you. We will stand beside you. But we will never again stand beneath you." Then, the Drenovian delegation began to hum, a low, resonant sound that was their highest form of respect. The Chelhari clicked their mandibles in rhythmic applause. The Korath, the ancient silicon beings who rarely communicated at all, pulsed with a warm amber light that spread through the entire chamber like sunrise. Tessera Kine was appointed the first non-human ambassador to Earth. She traveled to the human homeworld on a diplomatic vessel and landed in the rebuilt city of Nairobi, which had become one of Earth's great cultural capitals during the years of isolation. She walked through streets lined with trees and music and laughter, past murals that told the story of humanity's journey from a small blue planet to the stars and back again. She saw human children playing in a park alongside young Chelhari who had come with their parents as part of the first wave of diplomatic families. A group of Drenovian hatchlings splashed in a fountain, while human teenagers watched them with delight. A Korath elder stood in a garden, completely still, glowing softly, while a human botanist explained the different flowers to it with patient enthusiasm. Tessara stood and watched these small, ordinary moments, and she felt something she had never felt before. It was not guilt, though she still carried that. It was not admiration, though she felt that too. It was something simpler. It was the feeling of witnessing a world that worked the way worlds were supposed to work. A place where different kinds of life existed together, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. She thought about Consul Zorath Vel, who was serving his sentence in a quiet detention facility on Thesak Prime. She thought about how he had looked at humans with those bored, dismissive eyes, and seen nothing of value. She wondered if he understood yet what he had failed to see. She suspected he did not. Some people never learned. But the galaxy was learning. Slowly, imperfectly, with stumbles and setbacks and arguments and mistakes, but it was learning. And humanity was there to help, the way it had always been there to help, not because it was told to, but because helping was what humans did. It was written into their nature as deeply as breathing or dreaming or looking up at the stars and wondering what was out there. Ambassador Ilara Voss retired after the assembly was established. She had given decades of her life to the cause of human dignity, first by fighting for it in a Senate that did not care, and then by defending it behind a barrier that the galaxy could not break. She had earned her rest. She moved to a small house on the coast of Nova Scotia, where the Atlantic Ocean met a rocky shore, and the air smelled of salt and pine. She planted a garden. She took long walks along the water, and let the sound of the waves wash away the memory of Senate chambers and diplomatic crises and the cold silence of space. On her last evening in this story, she sat on her porch as the sun went down, and the sky turned from gold to deep blue to black. The stars came out one by one, scattered across the darkness like sparks from a fire. She looked up at them and thought about how different they seemed now. For 42 years, those stars had represented a galaxy that took and took and took without gratitude. Now they represented something else, something that was not yet finished, but was finally, at long last, beginning. She smiled. It was a small, quiet smile, the kind that came from a place deeper than happiness. It came from knowing that the world was better than it had been, and that she had helped make it so, and that the people she loved were safe and free and valued, and for the first time in a very long time, they did not look hungry. Earth's gates stood open once more, but this time the galaxy knew better than to forget the hands that built them.